Okay, well, welcome to the Graphic Medicine Podcast Monthly Wrap-Up. We're here and we are the one and only podcast dedicated to discussing comics and how they interact with the issues of health, illness, disability, and caregiving. I am your co-host, Alex Thomas.
And I'm your co-host, MK Serwick.
And today's episode, we're going to have a conversation with the two winners of our 2025 Graphic Medicine International Collective Award in our new category, Educational Comics. Very excited to talk to these two winners. But before we do that, MK, how have you been?
I've been good. Very excited. The Ladies Do Comics online comics fair just wrapped up, so I'm eager to see how everybody did. I was sharing some of the graphic medicine relevant content from that. Hopefully people enjoyed that. It's finally today's the first day of breaking the heat where I live, which is Southwest Michigan, and I'm watching my dahlias grow, which I'm very excited about. So that's what's going on with me. How about you, Alex?
It's been a good summer. I think that it's been tricky with kids because I don't know if you heard this, but yesterday in Chicago, where I live, the air quality in Chicago was the worst on planet Earth yesterday. So this summer has been a lot of like not going outside depending on the weather and that kind of thing. So it's been a summer. So our kids went to camp. I have a 7 and a 9-year-old. So they're at camp the first part of the summer, but the second part of the summer we've been going to zoos and we went to Door County with the family. But a lot of the time with these air quality things, it's like it's turning into a summer of like video games, which I actually kind of love because it's my kids are getting into the stuff that I played as a kid as well. So it's really fun to kind of go through that. There's a place in Brookfield, Illinois called Galloping Ghosts, and it is they say on the sign, I don't know if this is true, but they say it's the world's largest arcade of like old classic arcades.
Oh, wow.
And it's amazing. That place is amazing. You go in there and it's just like a labyrinth of every arcade from like the 80s you can imagine, and 90s probably. The kids love it. They don't fully understand, the level of patience it takes to have to like stand in front of an arcade for, hours on end with quarter after quarter. But this place, it's you pay at the front, it's free play, but that place has been great. So anyway, I feel like I'm imparting my video game knowledge on my kids this summer as we're trying to avoid catastrophic weather that could, hurt us. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
and I like that they're standing up too, right? Like as opposed to sitting playing a game, they're standing up so that
yeah.
um and and uh and was it crowded? Like are a lot of people turning to this, or is this kind of a you and your family thing?
It's I'd say it's crowded with more adults than kids,
Uh,
but there's a lot of people in my boat, like parents who are trying to show their kids where you'd have to leave the house to play a video game in the good
yeah.
old days. But yeah, I think it's a pretty busy place because I think it is kind of like a regional, little local tourist attraction.
Uh,
But it's nowhere near crowded, and it truly feels like you're in the 80s because the building itself is like it's like a old building.
oh,
So
how
it's
interesting.
it's nice. It's
I'm
nice.
I'm vaguely curious. I grew up not super far from there, so I'll have to check it out next time I'm out there. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Our air quality was bad as well. We're literally on the other side of the lake from you, for those of you listening, giant Lake Michigan. And it was bad as well. Is this more Canadian wildfires?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's Canadian wildfire stuff, which is really wild because this, I'm an allergist as well. And so one of the things that is like a new question I have to ask patients is like, has the Canadian wildfire smoke been affecting your symptoms at all? And it's odd. It's a very weird thing that we're living in. But I will say that, the funny thing with my patients, with the wildfire smoke, my patients with severe asthma are usually fine because they already fear the weather and the environment. So they're already like, yeah,
They
I check the air
protect
quality. I
themselves.
don't obviously I don't go outside when the air quality is bad. I check that every day. So like those folks are like already kind of prepared for this type of hostile external world. It's my milder patients who are like, I'm jogging every day and my eyes are like burning up. I don't know why. And it's like these are like horrible air quality days. You're not aware of it, but it's a new world, new set of problems we're dealing
Yeah.
with.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I had dinner last night with someone from Seattle, and we were complaining about the 150 air quality yesterday, which was red zone for us. And she's like, "Yes, ours are 500." So, and I was like, "Don't minimize our suffering."
And it's funny when I went on this family trip with like my extended family to Door County, and so we thought we were in this like really beautiful natural area, and in the morning I was like, oh, look at this beautiful mist in the morning, and I realized that it was no, that's the wildfire smoke. It's just
Yeah.
settled in that area. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, you guys will have to come over to this side of the lake, Southwest Michigan. It's really wonderful.
I know. That's where we got to go. Unless something else changes with the wind pattern, maybe Chicago's where we need to be. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's hard to know. Well, yeah, it's great to catch up with you, Alex. So yeah, this is our monthly roundup episode. We're really committed to trying to do this every month. Yeah, let's start with our first segment, which is graphic medicine news, which is basically just news from the graphic medicine website. So I guess I'll just jump in here. So since I kind of co-run the website, a few things that we've kind of been following and sharing there are the drawing together is on our summer hiatus. We're going to start back up in September. I finally just posted the May video, which is a really, really cool session. It's with Rocio Pichon Rivera and Matteo Farinella, and they were looking at drawing a sense of place in graphic medicine. And normally I just sort of excerpt like the exercise, have the person who's reading the page following later, just do the exercise. But this one, I just posted the whole video because they talked through while we were drawing. And it's so fun to follow along with because Rocio does this really interesting history of landscape paintings generally. And she starts out with like, it's a very sordid history. And so, of course, then my ears perked up like, ooh, what's sordid about landscape painting? And of course, she had all this like great stuff. And then Matteo, of course, they're both so talented. And Matteo did this whole thing on really, really interesting survey of comic artists and how they portray landscapes. And one of the things they were pushing us to do is to do landscapes very differently. Like, don't think you have to be accurate. And she's like, share really cool examples. And you're like, yeah, it's kind of cool to have it at a funky angle in an exam room or whatever in graphic medicine. So I highly recommend checking out that full video and playing along with them.
They did a session at a workshop at the Toronto Graphic Medicine Conference that I attended. That was so great. It was really, I don't know. I think it was similar to. I think it was also about landscapes, but yeah, that was fantastic. So I'm looking forward to that video.
Yeah, yeah. And part of why this was actually, I chased them down. What I try to do is get at least the people who do workshops that I can't go to. All my work with graphic medicine is ultimately somewhat self-centered. What I wanted to be able to do the workshops that I couldn't go to, right? Because you had to do something else. So I try to get the people who do workshops to come then do a drawing together for anyone who missed it. And then, of course, we all can't make it to the conference. So this was me chasing them down from that Toronto workshop.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, thanks for making that connection. So the next thing is that the Sequential Artist Workshop Graphic Medicine Summit was the last week or July 18th and 20th. And it was really amazing. I had to do something else and I wasn't able to attend as much as I wanted to. So I'm very happy to say that at least I think 7 of the videos of the sessions are online. So there's still more to come. And I'll include a link to the playlist as he's posting things on YouTube to the show notes. Then my last thing is that Comic-Con took place this last weekend. I know, Alex, you've done graphic medicine panels at Comic-Con. It was in San Diego again. And graphic medicine, even though you weren't able to be there, was represented on a couple panels at an artist and publisher tables and the Eisner Awards. I think one of the best ways is to just check out Matthew No's photo stream on Instagram.
Yeah.
And then for the Eisners, I'll link also to the full list of winners. I also want to just add that the best U.S. edition of an international material went to the same as winner of our GMIC award for long form, Jellyfish by Baum. So that was exciting.
That's great. Yeah, the Saw Graphic Medicine Summit was fantastic, and I think the videos I was just perusing what's on the playlist now, and they really are the full kind of sessions of the ones included. So it's great. If you weren't able to join us for the summit, it's a great way to kind of follow along. And there's wonderful sections where people are kind of reading through their comics, and that's something that with graphic medicine conferences, prior to that I don't know. I guess I'd never been to like a conference where creators read their comics in that way, and it's such a great way of kind of like one, transmitting the information in that type of venue, but also like seeing a creator read their own comic gives you a lot of insight into how they were thinking, and a lot of times when you read something, you read it in your own voice, so it's really fascinating. And so those sessions were full of those types of things, and so just that by itself, I thought is a fascinating thing to just watch as creators read their own work and highlight sections that they want to share.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of performed comics, like the way that Bob Sikoric does those carousels. He's done that one for
Hmm.
us a couple conferences. I just think performed comics are amazing. We have like a storytelling group here in Southwest Michigan. I'm trying to get the guy meeting with him to try to include letting people read comics, right? Like, because performed comics are
Yeah.
just amazing. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's
then
great. And it's,
oh,
well,
go
I
ahead.
was just saying there's a little bit less pressure to speak. You have time to kind of take a breath and have people absorb the images too. So to me, it's a little bit less intense than just reading like a prose novel
Yeah,
publicly.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So great. All right. So now I have some news from the GMIC board. The big news is that we had our virtual summit this summer, but next summer, summer 2026, the Graphic Medicine Conference will be in person, and we have the location. It'll be Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. I believe it's going to be July 2026. If that's wrong, I'll edit that out. But it should be. I'm pretty sure it's July. So the theme of the conference and the speakers are all being finalized, as well as the call for proposals that will be, send out. That's all being worked on now. So we'll keep you tuned, to all of those things. And this is a great opportunity to remind you that we have a newsletter that you can subscribe to. If you go to our graphic medicine website, it's just on the right banner of the homepage. It's a weekly newsletter that goes out on Saturdays. And if you follow the newsletter, you'll be the first to know any updates about the conference and when that call for proposals is coming out, as well as what the theme of the conference will be. But in general, get your travel plans prepared for July of 2026 for Baltimore.
Cool, cool. Yeah, I'm on it.
Alrighty, now on to our conversation with the winners of the first Educational GMIC Award, Sarah Peitzmeyer and Maya Kobabe. Welcome to the Graphic Medicine Podcast, Sarah and Maya, and congratulations on the success of your book and including the award.
Thanks for
So
having
first
us.
off, can you each introduce yourself? Sarah, why don't you start?
Sure. Thanks so much for having us. My name's Sarah Peitzmeyer. I'm an associate professor at the University of Maryland, College Park. And my research was the basis of the book that we wrote together. I do work on gender-based violence prevention as well as LGBTQ health promotion. So thanks again for having us.
And
And
hello.
Maya, how about you? Yeah.
Hello. My name's Maya Kobabe. I use the pronouns em, air. I'm a cartoonist and author. My first book was Genderqueer, a memoir about coming out to my friends and family community and sort of discovering my own words to describe my non-binary trans identities. And Breathe, Journeys to Healthy Binding was the second book that I worked on with Sarah. And it was very fun, very different from my memoir work, but extremely rewarding to turn this research into a comic book format, which hopefully will reach the masses.
Yeah, yeah. So let's pick up there. So, whichever you wants to kind of go first, can you give us a history of the project, how this came to be?
Do you want me to start or?
You got to start, Sarah.
Okay. Okay. So, um, I'll start because the idea sort of started with me. I had been doing research on chest binding for the better part of a decade and kind of just felt a little stuck. We were, publishing papers and doing all these, analyses, but I felt like the information wasn't really getting out to the communities that we wanted it to get out to. I would periodically get emails from trans youth or their pediatricians or their teachers or their parents being like, oh, like I'm trying to help, my kid bind in a healthy way, but I can't access your journal article. Can you send it to me? And that's just, I assumed, the tip of the iceberg of people who were motivated enough to reach out to me. And so I wasn't really sure what to do. I had been kind of playing with some different ideas. Should I be like putting videos on YouTube? Like how should I get this out? And then I came across a blog post by another researcher who was like, I wrote a comic book about my research. And immediately I was like, that's it. This is the idea. I have to do this. We have to create a comic book about this. It's perfect. And by like happy coincidence, I had just read Maya's memoir and I was like, and Maya would be the perfect collaborator. So I just sent an email totally out of the blue and totally did not expect Maya to respond, but you did. And then that's history. So
Yeah. And I believe, if I remember right, that email came in spring of 2020, I want to say. It was definitely during lockdown. And you caught me at a good time. I'd finished my first book. I finished sort of the tour of my first book. We were all stuck at home. I was definitely kind of brainstorming, what is my next idea going to be? What is my next project going to be? And also, I hadn't yet been hit by the book bans and book challenges, which have really deeply impacted my career. So my email was still on my website, which is not anymore. Um, so Sarah was able to reach me kind of with a cold out of the blue email. And before I have now had top surgery, but before I had top surgery, I used binders. I used a couple different, brands and methods of binding over the years, and definitely all of the information that I received about binding, was just through friends and community and like Tumblr. Like I don't ever remember seeing like a researched, sort of, health professional backed piece of information about it. And so when you reached out and you said, we've done all of these studies, I was like, wow, this sounds great. I mean, this is a topic that really impacts my community, my friends, and I really care about this. I have a personal connection with it, and I would love to do what we can to see how we turn this into a comic format. And our first idea was to make actually a much smaller format, like zine, that we would either print very cheaply and try to somehow distribute maybe to LGBTQ centers around the country, or perhaps just make available for free online. So we were really thinking zine at first, and we were thinking maybe 24 pages. And that was kind of where we first started. And Sarah explained that she might be able to get some grant funding for us. So that was kind of the beginning of it.
And then it kind of like
Great.
grew from there. We kind of like joked that neither of us is capable of half-assing anything. Because like once we started writing, we were like, oh, but we need to like also have a whole second half with like all these workbook pages that like readers can really dig into their own binding practice. And we wrote the first three characters first, and we are like, we're missing someone. Like there's another person whose stories need to be told. And then we added the fourth character. So it just kind of like once we started, we couldn't stop until you have the book before you today.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yes, I mean, so a little bit about myself. I work in like educational comics, health educational comics. So, a lot of the work that I've done in the past has been collaborating with researchers who have, this wealth of research, and like you, Sarah, are looking for ways to find to share it, to make it more accessible. So that part of it really resonates with me, and I think that the obviously I'm biased, but I think going to comics is a great way of transmitting that information. Um, so Sarah, for you, I had a question about some of those original studies. I actually was because I was looking at the article from like the Journal of Pediatrics, and I
Mhm.
agree that it's like an impressive article, but if it's behind a paywall, you don't really reach a lot of the people that you want to affect with this. And so I guess that brings me to my first question, which is, from that original research that you did, were there findings about, people's attitudes and use of binding that surprised you, that motivated you to want to get more of that information out to folks affected by it?
Yeah, I would say so. Like, yeah, first of all, there were like two problems. One is that it was behind a paywall, and the second problem was that even if people got access to it, like that paper that you read, right? It's like Kaplan-Meier survival curves, like conditional probabilities of experiencing this outcome, like right? Like it's like how are most people supposed to understand that? So, and then I also was like getting to the point where you get like 3,000 words in most journals that I publish in, and that there wasn't really the space to have the kind of conversations that I wanted to have about the data. I feel like, we in one of our first articles, we had a statistic that we found that people who took at least one day off of binding each week tended to have better outcomes in terms of their physical health. And so we put that finding in the paper. But when that finding kind of trickled its way out to community, people were kind of offended by it because they were like, well, are you just telling us to stop binding like once a week? Like, like I can't go out in public without my binder. Like I can't live my life. And so that wasn't what I wanted to be telling people, but there wasn't a way to have like deeper and more nuanced conversations within the scope of an academic journal article. So like I wanted to be having conversations that were like, um, there's more than one way to bind. And so a lot of people only knew about like, oh, my friend binds with this particular binder and does it this way, and that's the only way I know how. So then if that way didn't work for their particular body and they were having problems with binding, they didn't know how to troubleshoot around that because that was the only way that they knew. And so like, why not write a book that shows four people having four very different journeys with binding and using four very different methods of binding? and having different goals around binding and showing people that and telling that through storytelling was something that was really interesting to me that didn't feel possible within the confines of an academic journal article.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the work really rides a fine line because, like you said, I think you could potentially offend those who bind by saying take a break from it when that may not be something that, would appeal to them in any way. And similarly, if you talk to like a healthcare provider who says, "Oh, this is causing this medical problem. You shouldn't do it." So why are we saying do it at all? But there's a whole world of nuance in between, and I think your work really captures that, especially at the end when you go into like the actual practical exercises and things like that, where you have healthcare providers saying, "This is how you can do it," and actually, minimize any negative health outcomes and still bind, and feel comfortable that you're not, hurting yourself. So I thought that it was great because that, like you said, those are things that you can't really get out of a journal article or like a patient handout, that someone would just get at a doctor's office or something.
Yeah, like we found people, like a lot of people had this like no pain, no gain mindset around binding that they had kind of resigned themselves to this idea that like binding was inherently painful. And that's not what I believed based on the data. And so we wanted to have these broader conversations about like, you deserve more. Like you get to bind and also feel good in your body and not have crippling pain.
Yeah.
And how do we support you in creating a binding practice? And really more broadly, like creating a life in which you are affirmed and binding as one of many tools for that affirmation. And I don't if you saw the pie chart activity in the back of the book. That's the activity I actually hear most about. I don't know, Maya, if you had other readers comment on other activities, but I most often hear about the pie chart activity where we ask people to kind of think about like, what is your whole toolbox of gender affirmation in your life? And how do we add to that toolbox? Are there tools that you like want to expand in your life? People really love that activity, and that for us is kind of again like that broader conversation about like we want you to be out there living your best life and have binding fit into that in sustainable and healthy ways.
It was also really important to me that we very firmly in every story acknowledge the mental health benefits of binding, and that we were starting from a place of saying, if binding is giving you mental health benefits, you should do it. Here are ways that you can do that that will impact you negatively the least, or like maximize those benefits and minimize any other potential outcomes. And I feel really good about how in every story, each person affirmed that binding was a really important part of their journey, whether that was long term or temporary, whether they had goals of top surgery or not having the goal of top surgery. And basically coming from like a yes, pro binding, people are going to bind. How do we do that in sort of like a very, yeah, gentle, affirming, positive way? I definitely think readers to me have often pointed out the stretch exercises. I would say there's 4 different stretch exercises, and we worked with a licensed massage therapist and a physical therapist. We asked both of them their bios in the book, and they're also both people who are in the trans and queer community. If you could highlight, yeah, like four exercises for your patients, what are the 4 you would highlight? Things that are pretty easy to do at home. Most of them can be done while sitting. Um, and with both drawings and text of how to do them, so very like IKEA handbook for your stretches. And a lot of people have said those are really useful, including people who don't bind. People who just said like, oh, I too have, maybe some back or neck pain from just work posture, and things like that, saying these stretches are really, really useful. So I'm super glad we were able to include those.
I mean, what I really loved also about that ending section as well was going into detail about like some of the medical things that are brought up. So like, I think in the stories, some of these people were talking about, oh, like my breathing was rattly or something like that, and then at the end it was talking about like atelectasis, like when you can't expand your lungs all the way for long enough, you can get like pneumonia. And so I think it's really important when you're including, medical information to be as like clear as possible and not to omit anything either. And so it was a great way of just having everything kind of laid out, in a very understandable, but like also very comprehensive way. So I thought that was great. So from what I'm hearing, this was like both of your first time collaborating in this kind of way, correct? So
Yes.
I guess so Maya, for you, how exactly did the collaboration work? And like, were you both writing together, or was there, how was like the process of kind of the script making versus the data that you wanted to include, and I think we'll have more questions about the actual storytelling as well. But I'm just curious about how this collaboration worked.
It was extremely collaborative. Basically, we worked, it was all during the pandemic. So we were meeting over Zoom, we were emailing, we were using shared documents, and we really passed it back and forth many times from hand to hand. So obviously, first I received a big package of data from Sarah's team, which was, they'd already done a ton of work on it. It was, I will say, a slightly intimidating, maybe 30 plus page document when I first received it. And to receive 30 pages of text when we were aiming for a 24-page comic was like, oh boy, we're gonna have to cut this back a lot. But Sarah's team and Sarah had already done a ton of work of basically taking quotes from transcribed interviews with the research participants and gathering them kind of by experience type, sometimes by age group, and kind of already weaving out storylines. So when I already received it, even my first pass of reading it, I was like, oh, there's stories here. I could already see kind of places where, images were popping up. There was the participant who talked about being on the frisbee team. I was like, oh, we gotta have that. We gotta draw the frisbee team. Like that's just such a great visual, and it's so queer. Like this frisbee team full of trans people who are all struggling to breathe because everyone's trying to bind while doing sports at their queer club. So there's some great visuals in there, a storyline about someone trying to play tennis while wearing two or three sports bras. It was just, I could already see kind of the way we could, because all of the characters are a fictional character, but all of them are based on composites of these quotes from real people to both, protect the privacy of the research participants, but also create stories that are based in reality and grounded, but hopefully somewhat more universal. So basically, I got this big document with these sort of beginnings of these characters, and then I would go through and do a pass of like rearranging quotes, shortening quotes, putting things in a certain order to sort of build out the narratives that I was seeing, cutting things back, making suggestions, and then I would pass it back to Sarah, and Sarah would take a pass and then pass it back to me, and just I don't even remember how many times we did it, but it was fairly slow. It was over the course of maybe 2 years, I want to say, because, we took breaks during some of the academic holidays. Sarah had a maternity leave during this experience. So we really just kind of very organically let it grow, passing it back and forth. And then I started doing sketches of potential characters. I developed, I think, 8 potential body types and ages because we wanted a very like diverse group, both in terms of age and race and like kind of in the spectrum of non-binary and transmasculinity. Um, so I developed character sketches, and then I actually went and I designed a bedroom for each character because I wanted to design like a personal space that had kind of objects and sort of an aesthetic that would help me figure out who each character was. And then, once we had the script much more tight, I did a thumbnail pass, but I also gave that back to Sarah, got notes, re-thumbnailed. Then we started developing the workbook pages, some of which Sarah had some visuals for, including the pie chart that we've already mentioned, and the sort of timeline exercise where you sort of try to draw out milestones on your binding journey, including what method you were using and how you're feeling. And but some of those we also sort of back and forth, but developed new ideas for visuals for them. Yeah, and then we worked with the professionals on the exercises, and it kind of just sort of slowly grew and grew and grew and gained length and gained momentum until we finally had to accept that actually we were writing a book, not a zine, and then we decided to seek for a traditional publisher.
That's great. I mean, you can really feel the level of collaboration there because it doesn't, in educational materials, a lot of times you'll see something where like a 30-page packet is just handed to a cartoonist who just has to create something, and there's not a back and forth, and you can tell because it's just like walls of text and things, not really a good narrative that's there, and so this is like that. I mean, this is why it's very appropriate as a book that you'd buy at a bookstore because it is a really interesting narrative, but then also it functions as like what also could be a public health handout. It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I didn't like fully realize at the time what we were doing was maybe a little bit unique or less common, at least in terms of like having the two halves of the book and having like kind of the second half be a little bit more didactic or maybe toward the end of the spectrum of like kind of the info sheets kind of thing, but having really strong narrative in the front. And I think some of that is just like I'm a mixed methods researcher, so I do qualitative work and quantitative work and feel both are very important. And then it kind of reflected in like the two halves of the book, sort of too, I think. And then just like our collaborating across disciplines as we did, I think like that really shaped the way the book ended up.
Yeah, and I love that what you're testifying to is how long this process can take, right? When you said, this organically developed, and yeah, COVID gave that great opportunity to take the time to do it. But I'm sure, Alex, you deal with this, and I certainly work with students who are, by the end of the term, I have to have a zine on how to, break up with your therapist or whatever. It's something I'm
Vital.
a student on. But yeah, stuff like, and like, we've got to have this like full research-based thing by the end of a term, or I've worked with someone doing a study like by the end of this, academic year or whatever. And I really like that you took the time it takes and you really testified to how that process is really and then sometimes you need those breaks to develop just the because you're not maybe like literally emailing each other, but you're thinking about it, right? Like that creative process and the research process, they can be sort of deliberative, and it's nice that you really took the time to do that. So as you talk, I'm just sort of really tumbling to the fact that like as an OG member of the queer community, like how in a lot of ways this is like our underground history. Because this is the stuff that went on underground, right? Like you say, you couldn't find this stuff online, and maybe there was a Tumblr where someone started, but for the most part, yeah, this is information that was passed between people and you learned, and hopefully you met someone who gave you good advice. But I'm really fascinated that this sort of like old time underground history that goes back, as you reference the old books that are out there, like Stone Butch Blues and all that. Like that's the kind of the source material. How did this become research for you, Sarah? That's what I'm really fascinated about.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this also like became research in sort of a similar way, which we allude to in the book, is that like the first study that was done on this, like the survey went viral on Queer Tumblr. It was like totally unfunded, $0. Nobody got any money for participating, but because everyone like recognized like, hey, we're all binding, our friends are all binding, and there's literally zero peer-reviewed health articles about this, and we deserve to have access to information about our own bodies. Like we are all going to participate in this survey together and create a data set that gives that information back to us. And so I was actually brought on by friends who had led that effort. They bind and their friends bind and all of that. And so they were the ones who recognized this need. And at the time, I actually didn't know what binding was, and they were the ones who like brought me into the work. And I feel so grateful for that to this day that they generously brought me onto the work. And so they had put this survey out. It went viral. They had 1,800 plus people respond to it. And then they were like, oh, we just realized like we're not really sure how to analyze this data, but you know how to analyze data. So that's how I got involved in the work. And then one thing kind of led from there to another.
That's
They
fair.
said, we know a cool friend who knows how to do statistics. Let's bring in our cool friend who knows statistics.
Absolutely.
Then clearly they found the right person because
Yeah.
the way that you were able to not only do that, but to work with the narratives and to kind of like do the work that you were doing back and forth, it takes a special person. Yeah, yeah, they clearly
Yeah.
found the right
Thank
for
you.
both of
And
you.
yeah, definitely have like a team of folks. Kieran is appears in the book, and they did all the interviews for that informed the four characters in the book. And yeah, so
There's
just
yeah,
yeah, very
many
great.
people to thank.
Yeah.
I think both of
Yes.
us, I also worked with another queer cartoonist friend, Ashley Guillory, who did the colors. Like this was a book made by many hands,
Yes.
as I think most books and also most research is. And also, yes, the finished book is like just over 60 pages. I think it's 64 if I'm remembering correctly. And it took us 4 years to produce like 64 finished pages of comics-based research-based comics. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I'm so passionate about graphic medicine and its application for educational, uses, because this is the kind of thing that, you know, that each of you could not have done in isolation from each other.
No,
You know what I mean?
absolutely
And
not.
so, I think a lot of times, like a casual, person who's heard of graphic medicine, for the first time, may think of it as strictly memoir, comics, which is a huge part of it. But I think this is like this incredible need that's there, and I think that the fact, Sarah, that like those surveys became so popular immediately showed that there was like a need and this like vacuum of information, and like this is like such a perfect puzzle piece for that missing space. And I think that, the robustness of the research and the ability of your team to be able to talk to people in the field and get kind of firsthand information, coupled with Maya's like obviously like expertise in comics, and then like on the heels of like genderqueer, it's like perfect fit. But at the same time, it's like this is why like yeah, it's not a bad thing to collaborate and for not every comic has to be made in like isolation, by a single person, because this is where I feel like there's such opportunity, and there's so many other subjects where there's and I see it all the time in my work where there's like a research team that is like so much data and just they don't know what to do with it, or like they work with their stats person's daughter who's in high school and interested in graphic design. It's like, no, not that, get a professional. And so it's like, I think when enough, I don't know, important is put on each side, each end of the collaboration, then you make this amazing work. So I'm just such a great example. I'm glad that we have this award to kind of show as kind of an example of like the excellence that can be in this kind of subgenre of graphic medicine.
And from the
Um,
provider perspective, just before you go on, Alex, I think that from the provider perspective, I think that this is as welcome because a lot of providers want to know more and to know how to advise their patients. So I think this is not just important for people who are binding and thinking about it and wanting to learn or improve their practice, but also for people who are advising and seeing patients or family members or whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, I obviously have a lot of clinical collaborators, and I was talking to a dear friend and colleague who's a physician assistant, like kind of probably around the time we started this book. And, she was like, oh, I don't talk to my patients about binding because I don't know what to tell them. Like, there's not enough of an evidence base, or I don't have resources to like give recommendations in response to what they bring to me. And, a lot of providers are kind of trained in that, like, why screen if you can't treat sort of framing. So, um, I was like, okay, well, like we actually now are starting to have enough of an evidence base that we can give evidence-based recommendations with the best available data. And now here's a resource that you can give your patients, because clinicians are also under a lot of pressure. They're moving to like 15-minute visits with their patients. They also don't always have the space to have those really nuanced conversations about like finding joy in your binding practice, like that. And so if we can support patients in discovering some of that themselves outside of even the context of the visit, and providers can kind of point them toward this as a resource, that's a huge win.
Yeah, and that kind of brings me to my next question about that is kind of the decision of transitioning from like a zine website to a full comic. Um, it definitely sounds like obviously you went from like maybe a 24-page zine to, like you said, like a 60-page full book. Do you feel like there's do you lose any audience by having it kind of be in book format versus kind of a shorter format website thing? Is there, I don't know, I mean this is like a tension that I always have in the work that we make as well, where it's like, okay, if we go deeper, it's going to probably affect people in a deeper way, but then maybe less people. And how do you navigate that kind of tension between the two poles?
I certainly hope we aren't losing any audience by putting out a traditional book. And one of the choices, or one of the factors that impacted our decision, was actually getting an offer from a major publisher. So this book is out from Dutton, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House. It's also kind of under the umbrella of Penguin at Random House Young Readers. So it's obviously one of the biggest publishers in the United States. And we knew that if we went with Penguin Random House, they would get it in every Barnes and Noble in America. And that was just kind of a reach of distribution that neither of us would have been able to handle alone. And I know this, as a fact because I've been self-publishing comics for like over 10 years at this point. So I also have the experience of putting out zines, posting them on my own personal website, putting them on Tumblr, putting them on social media, and then, just going the Zine Fest circuit and just trying to, sell things on, on Etsy or what have you. And I just know like sort of my limits as an individual person for what I can distribute and frankly what I can like just ship, the units I can shift as an individual, and they are not at the same level as what a major publisher can do. So if we had not gotten any offers from a really big publisher, we might have if we'd only received very small offers or offers that didn't include like good distribution, we might have not taken them, and we might have gone, no, we're going to do this self-publishing website route. But this publishing offer, and we also worked with an editor that we really loved, who was really supportive of the project, Andrew Carr at Dutton. Um, And I think that having that kind of editorial support, and specifically like they matched our vision of being like, we ended up printing the book in just one color in addition to black. So it's printed in blue and black, very fun home. Um, and and on relatively inexpensive paper for a color comic, because we wanted to keep the price point as low as possible. So we were trying to keep it like under 15 or even under $12 in hopes that, again, it's like within the range of like a teenage buyer. So like we were really honestly, our a lot of our publishing choices were driven by thoughts about distribution and access. And really we made that choice because we're like, what is the choice that we can make that will make this book like within reach of the most like teens, guardians and care providers and parents of teens, and yeah, like LGBTQ centers like in the entire country, hopefully.
Yeah, I really give credit to Maya for the book expansion idea because like having come into this having never written a book, books were not really on my radar, and so I was kind of thinking, oh, free is the most accessible, so we'll just put it
Mm,
online. But I didn't really think about how like that is really I've heard this referred to as like the loading dock model of knowledge transfer, that you just like put the knowledge on the loading dock and you're trusting that people will somehow find it
like
and
yes, drive up to the dock, pick up their
yeah,
own packet and head off.
exactly.
Yes.
And like, no, nobody is going to my academic website. Like, nobody is going to find like this random zine that I post on a website. But if it's published by as a book, like they're going to go into their local library and their librarian is going to recommend it to them. And have had so many people like send me pictures of like, oh, look, I saw your book in a bookstore. So I think it's like really getting out to people in a way that even though it's cost money and is longer, we're
Hmm.
actually reaching more folks than we would have with the free version online. And we do hope to eventually publish a free version online as well. So.
Yeah, and I have a sample
Yeah.
on my website, and I think once the book has maybe been out for longer, we may end up actually publishing even more of it online in some format for free as well. So like we haven't given up on that idea either. But I just again like as a person who has spent many, many years trying to build up an online audience and trying to share work online and get eyeballs on my work online, like even with the platform that Genderqueer has given me, I still didn't think that I could solo reach as many people as a book in a bookstore could.
Yeah, I
Yeah, I
really
mean,
appreciate that
that makes
insight.
a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing also is just the idea that having a book like this from a major publisher in a bookstore is like incredibly empowering and legitimizing for like a teen seeing it at Barnes and Noble. I think that is incredibly powerful. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So one other question I had: are we good on time for you both?
Yeah.
This is a great conversation. So, have you spoken to the original storytellers of the work, and what were their impressions of the finished product?
Like the participants who's
Hmm.
yeah, so that was really important to me. They were all really true partners in the work. So the study that informed the character stories, there were 25 people. We call them the Breathe cohort, and we talked to them literally every day for 90 days. And so it really like they were so invested in the project. We did an in-depth interview with them at the beginning for like 90 plus minutes, then like had daily surveys where we were contacting them daily for 90 days, and then did a final exit interview. And so most of the material for the character stories comes from that first interview, but like all of the data that they contributed to the study informed the work. And they were paid some for their participation, but honestly, not enough given like the very intensive level. And so, like, we're so grateful to them. And so, it was very important to me that this go back to them first. So, before we finalized the book, we sent them like the draft of the book to allow them to request any changes if they felt there was anything that was too identifying or they felt that we didn't capture it properly. We got a couple small requests for tweaks about like, oh, like, can you tweak this piece? I think this represents my story better, or like, oh, you actually like had it was typo, but like, yeah, in their story. So there were like little things, and like got their impressions, and they're okay to move forward with it, and that was really important to me. And then when it was published, I sent them all a copy, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah, that's great. Good.
Maya, you referenced the banning of genderqueer. Um, I'm curious about, I mean, we could do a whole episode, I'm sure, about just what you alluded to, but how that's impacted your professional life and your career, but we don't need to go into that now. What I'm curious about is if you've seen, or either of you, push back with this book, banning, pushback.
Not yet. Not yet. Definitely, I think, Sarah contacted me before my work had been challenged, and then we worked together over the years of it being challenged. So, it became I would say, increasing likelihood. And also we are, living in an era in which trans healthcare is being challenged at almost every level, not just healthcare for minors, but also healthcare for adults. The fears of it being, stripped out of Medicaid and just, we're in a pretty intense time in the trans healthcare sphere, right? So as we worked on this book, it just felt more and more important that we get this information out there. Um, and I would say that we're both mentally prepared for it to be challenged
Yeah.
somewhere, and I will honestly be more surprised if it is not challenged than if it is. But I have not yet heard of a case. So,
Yeah, I think my theory is that it's flying under the radar currently because just I didn't know what binding was before I got involved in this work. Like most cis people don't know what binding is. So like and like, Maya's memoir had gender and queer in the title.
it
So
does. And this
like
book does not have the words either queer, trans, non-binary, or anything like that in the title of the book. And as we know, book banners, for the most part, don't read. So they are just keyword searching titles and subject matter. And like, I think, yeah, for the very least, the first year of this book has been peaceful and lovely.
Yeah, it was all keywords based, wasn't it? I mean, it was like this one day that the like National Library of Medicine was just swept, and I just happened to note it because I mean you did as well. My menopause book got pulled up and because
Mm,
it dealt with queer trans experiences in the kind of keywords about the book. But you're right, I'm sure no one picked up that book and read it. To your point.
yeah.
Yeah, we're just living in a weird world where we're just avoiding AI sweeps of content being produced now. It's yeah, depressing. Well, I'd hate to end on that note. Let me ask one more question.
Please do.
um, how important do you both feel the use of the narrative was in kind of
Hmm.
transmitting this didactic information? Because I think a lot of times, either a research team may say, "Oh, that's not necessary; just need the facts transmitted," or a creator may say, "I don't need to talk about the science; I'm talking about this person's story." So, how do you feel that both of those are important to inform the other?
I have thoughts about this. Okay, so
Please.
I feel very strongly that you really need both, and I think that like the second half of the book would have fallen completely flat. Like it would be like practically useless in my opinion had it not had the narratives in front because I think like that's how we build trust with the reader is telling the stories of the participants from our study, and I don't think it's clear why they should listen to us until they've like seen how we treated the stories of people like them in their own community, right? And so I think like we really needed that. And there was like, I'm such an academic, like I came to the stories with like learning objectives and like how we wrote it. And so those are all woven in like throughout the stories as well. Like I said, like one big one was showing people there are different ways of binding. And so like you can't just write that, just like show people that like different people having different ways of binding. So I think that that was really critical to start with that and to build trust with readers through the storytelling before we went into the more didactic piece. We actually just wrote another journal article that we're submitting now, like talking, like we had people take a pre-test, read the book, do a post-test, and then participate in a focus group about like what did they take away from the book. Did it shift knowledge, attitudes, and behavior, as we say in public health? And people really talked about like how important the didactic piece also was for them to like help them really understand like the recommendations that they may have seen elsewhere but didn't fully appreciate before. So they were like, oh yeah, like people always told me don't wear ace bandages, but until I saw like your diagram of anatomy, like in the second half of the book, I couldn't really see what the ace bandages were doing to your rib cage and your lungs. And so like having that didactic piece was also really important for folks. So I feel like they really dovetail well together and like help each other tell the story and yeah, get the information out.
I obviously also think they are both very important. And One thing I'll say is that I, as a person who's written a lot of memoir and including some sort of more nonfiction journalism comics, I really I thought it was very important that Sarah appear in the book as a character, which is also something that Sarah had not initially
I did
considered
not
or
like this idea.
come up with. But I thought too, it's about that building trust, right? It's about showing the face of the researcher behind the data and saying, "Hello, this is my name. I'm this person. This is how I encountered this work." And saying, I am the researcher who's bringing this data to you, but like also I worked with a big team of people, and and these are stories from many people. And so like I felt it was very important to include Sarah as a character on the very first page, a sort of introductory page of the book, and then to bring Sarah again in as a character in the final pages, when she's sort of explaining some of the actual sort of numbers behind the research data. And part of that is just also my instinct as a comic artist is like information is just like more, it feels more human and it's more easily digested and just like works better within the tools and confines of a comic if it's set in a speech bubble by a character who has a face and a facial expression and a asymmetrical haircut. And like there's just things about it that really humanize that story when it's being said by a human. And so I really encourage Sarah to be a character on the page, and I'm really glad that she was willing to do that, even though it was a little uncomfy. And then I sort of like I don't appear as a character in the book, but Genderqueer the book has a cameo in the book, which I feel is like my stand-in as my sort of cameo in the story. So that was one way too. I was like that to put both of us into the work as well.
That's great. I mean, one thing I really liked about the end kind of like didactic section was that the characters from the book were in it,
Mm.
and there was a lot of like callbacks. Like there's a section where you see the binding being burned that was in that one character's story from their childhood,
Mhm.
and so I think that was such a efficient use of a callback where all of that nuance is brought into the didactic part, so that it doesn't need to be re-explained, but it's like you remember that from the book you just read. So it's a great example of how those two things can really energize each other. Um, Great. MK, do you have any other final questions?
No, I think I'll stop there. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Was there anything, I know that just as the first year of the educational segment of these awards, which we're so hyped about and we feel like so grateful about our lucky timing to swoop into the educational category. But I don't know, have you already talked in the podcast about sort of the creation of the educational
I was
category?
also really curious about that, so I'm glad you said that. I didn't know we were allowed to ask you questions, so
I
Yeah,
love
yeah,
it.
absolutely.
I love it. I love it. So say more. So what, yeah, say more.
like what led you to add this category this year that you didn't have previously? Yeah.
Yeah, Alex, did you want to address that as a
Yeah,
judge?
yeah, I can talk a little bit about it. So I think graphic medicine as a community has been around for a long time, and I think that there's always different areas of interest for people creating works of graphic medicine, and so there is a group of people that really think of graphic medicine as or use graphic medicine as an educational tool. And I think a lot of times, and a lot of it has to do with a lot of these didactic type comics not being published by publishers, that they're not really as well known to like the casual observer. And so one thing that we have just noticed over the years is that at our conferences, there are a lot of these really interesting educational comic projects and works that were being shared and published in academic journals, but not necessarily like taught at a undergrad course about graphic medicine. And so part of it is that we I definitely feel like personally I was always pushing for this, is that this was kind of like a subgroup of graphic medicine that should be more recognized, so that others know that these are ways that you can work. Because I think that and I'm so glad that we had this conversation with you both just about the use of collaboration and how there's really important work that can be done and should be done that can only be done, in my opinion, by making it's like this. And so the awards, number one, the awards, that's also a relatively new thing that we have just started doing in the past few years. And so after we had kind of a short form and a long form from the beginning, but even within the first year or two, we were already talking about how can we expand and add, a new category. Because one thing is that educational comics don't really fit in that rubric of short versus long form. And, a lot of these comics are zines or handouts or websites. And so it was also a way of saying, okay, there's work that are being made that we want to recognize, but they don't really fit in this, two category group. And so then, yeah, that's kind of how we thought about it. And then we, it was secured enough grant funding to expand the awards, not grant funding, donor funding. Let me rephrase that. And so that's it. And we're hoping to expand more as well. I think those are all things that, I think MK probably knows more than I do about that as well.
Yeah, I'm part of the committee that works with kind of creating the infrastructure for the awards, and it's been so carefully thought out. We work with a wonderful initial grantor who's so thoughtful. His Kevin, and he is so thoughtful about how to approach all of this and to make sure that it's fair and well done and very much controlled for, so many things, and then to be open to the kind of feedback that we were getting, which was in the face of so many memoirs, which are so moving and so important. A lot of the educational stuff wasn't feel like it was getting a fair shake. And we were getting that feedback from people who were shortlisters and judges from the works we were getting. And so it made perfect sense. And following up on things Alex said, like I just jumped on that because, I'm a nurse, and a part of why I'm in this is that I really think that some of the biggest problems between people trying to access care, people trying to provide care, are communication gaps, and communication of information is not efficiently delivered or received. And that's part of why I'm so into comics, because I think that it helps bridge that gap, because it's ways that even when you're stressed and you're sick or you're freaking out about a diagnosis, or just have shame or whatever it is that's keeping you from getting information that's going to help your health, this is a way to bridge that gap. And comics can be there in a way that you can receive when stressed and upset. That maybe we give handouts of information about medications or whatever, and nobody reads those. I saw it in my, be like, here's the printout. Nobody reads that. Like, let's make this something people can access. And then for the provider perspective, feel good about a resource that you really think your patient's going to interact with and come back with questions. So yeah, so that's kind of why I'm so excited about this category, and so appreciative that Alex has, really helped support and champion it as well.
Yeah,
And I'm also like, oh, go ahead. Good.
I was just gonna say, like, I read a lot of the other shortlisted folks for the award, and they were all incredible. And one of them, I think the HPV one, like they included in their submission like the final comic, but also like the original info sheet that the comic was based on. And that was so fun to like see the before and after glow up of like, it was interesting because like a lot of the information was identical, but it was like so engaging in the comic in a way that like you can't do with like the traditional doctor's office handout. And so that's really like the magic of comics, I feel like you were saying, MK. And yeah.
I love that idea of
Yeah.
like of the comics giving research data glow up. I love that. I think we should turn that into like sorry.
But I think, what I was going to say is I'm really happy that you're also doing like this post-intervention testing, because in the same way that seeing this book at Barnes and Noble gives it like legitimacy, so does a published paper showing its effectiveness, knock on wood. But I think that is so useful for other healthcare providers as well, when they know that there's this legitimacy to the intervention or the thing that they want to recommend to the person they're seeing. And I think for this project, I think because it has such a foundation of like very good, solid information from the people that are living it. I think that's why I'm very confident that it's going to be a very interesting paper that'll be powerful to share. So I think that this is such a good example of why why you can take data and make it really compelling and useful for people who need it.
And then the other thing I just wanted to say was I really appreciate your feedback about the fact that you really appreciated seeing the other people who were nominated with you and that you engage with those resources. I really appreciate that, because this, as the awards committee, this is the first year we've actually done that. And we used the SAW event as a chance to say like, hey, let's get some videos and let people speak for their own work like you guys created. I think that was really a good thing, and we'll probably keep doing that in the future. But believe it or not, we've not done that in the past. So I really
Yeah.
like that addition.
Please keep doing that. And anyone who's listening to this podcast who hasn't watched the video, you should go watch the video right after this, because it was like so cool to hear the authors reading from their own comics. And I've just been like really impressed and grateful. GMIC does such great work. I know said this to you earlier when you reached out to us, but you really like do so much to bring the field together and like introduce and highlight important work. And for as someone who's like new to the comics world, I say I'm a late in life convert to comics. Like you guys have been so welcoming too, and I know I met UMK in Ireland, and like just the warmth of the community is so wonderful, even to people like me who like can't barely draw a stick figure. So it's just been so great to be a part of this group.
I have to put in a caveat that Sarah and I worked on this entire book during the pandemic and only met in person for the first time this year when we did a back-to-back literary conference, scientific conference, presenting our work in two different, completely different venues. And Sarah did draw me a comic after that experience, and it's really good. So you may yet be drawing some more of your own comics. You know, you should
Maybe so.
don't poo-poo. But yes, both of us were lucky. We were able to both attend the online award ceremony, and it was just like a great presentation. Like there was readings
Yeah.
by almost all of the nominated authors, and I really enjoyed all of them. And obviously we were really hyped and excited and delighted to win. But also like huge props to everyone who was shortlisted because it was a really very, very strong group of work.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
toughest
yeah. I mean, I
choice
think
by the judges. Yeah.
absolutely. All right. Well, thanks for talking with us. Now, I have a final question for each of you, which is, what are you working on these days? That can be as
I
broad as a
yeah.
topic as you can think of. Yeah.
I am happily very close to wrapping up work on my third book, which will actually be my fiction debut. It's a middle grade coming of age graphic novel that I'm co-writing with a fellow non-binary cartoonist, Lucky Srikumar. And it's due out in 2026 from Scholastic Graphics. So I'm stepping into the world of kids comics and fiction, which I'm really excited about. But I am sure that there is more memoir and more graphic medicine work in my future after that.
Great.
I'm slowly working on drafting ideas for another book like Breathe was. So my other kind of big area of research, as I mentioned, was gender-based violence prevention, and have done a lot of work with trans survivors of intimate partner violence and really want to uplift some of their stories. We hear so often from folks that like it took them a long time to realize their relationship was abusive because all the stories they've heard of domestic violence are really centered around cisgender heterosexual women and their cis het male partners. And so like they didn't know what abuse could look like in their own relationships. And so that like when I hear that, I think storytelling is warranted. So I'm starting to work on some of that.
Great. Okay, I think this is going to take us to our next segment, which is, what are you reading? Who would like to go first? Maya,
I can
would you
go.
like to tell us what you're
Yes.
reading? Yeah.
I read constantly and all the time. And if anyone wants to follow my reviews, you can find them on Goodreads, Storygraph, Tumblr, my Patreon, etc. And I read a lot of comics, so I just finished a wonderful short middle grade story called Real Life, spelled Reel, by Kane Lynch, which is about a preteen who is dealing with all of the messy emotions that come up with parents separating, a divorce happening, and the teen trying to figure out who to trust, who to believe, how to stay close to both parents while also still willing to blame someone for his changed life circumstances, and decides to make a documentary film about the experience with his best friend. And then I also have Queer, a Graphic History um, by Meg John Barker and Jules. Is it Shirl? Shirl? I don't know how to pronounce this author's last name. But anyway, this is a book that's been on my TBR for a really long time, and a friend just lent it to me. So I'm excited to read some stuff about queer theory in graphics form.
Great. And
Um,
we're going to include all this information in our show notes if anyone is interested in anything we're talking about.
well, I immediately tried to look up all the other winners and shortlisters from the GMIC Awards. So I really loved Kesey Young's Sunflowers, which won the short form award. It's incredible. There's also a free version online for folks who want to find that right after you listen to this podcast. And then have also been working through Maggie Takuta Hall's books recently. So I read The Worst Ronin, which I really love. That's also a comic, and Squad, and I'm now reading The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea. So.
Mm.
Great. I guess I can go next. So graphic medicine wise, I've been rereading Coma by Zara
Mm.
Slattery.
Love that
This
book.
is amazing. It's an amazing book about her first person account of this harrowing infection that where she was in a coma for nearly 2 weeks, and eventually lost her leg from this, infection that really almost killed her. But then it's kind of this dreamlike interpretation of what her experiences was in this coma state, while her husband has kind of first person diary entries of what the day to day was like during that time and his kind of memory through all the stress, and just that contrast of the two is amazing. It's an amazing book, and her artwork is stunning, and it's just, yeah, it's a great work. I've read it a couple times and I just keep going back to it.
Yeah.
Okay, and then dumb non-graphic medicine wise, the Superman movie came out, so I had to go back to some of the inspiration books. So one of them that I loved at the time was Superman for All Seasons. I don't know. So this is a book that was written, I think it was in the late 90s, by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. I think a lot of like the elements, a lot of the movie kind of, I think, comes from this book, but it has to do with first, I don't know, like year of being Superman, and it's a very quiet kind of book about his just emotional kind of struggles of leaving home and handling these new powers in the big city. And it's a touching book. But I think one thing that made me think about it, as Maya, you were talking, is that having like people's bedrooms drawn is such a great way to kind of get into someone's character. And in this book, they have like sections where you see like Clark Kent's bedroom, and it's fascinating because you're like, oh, he eats peanut butter, he watches, he has a TV on his bedside. And in the movie too, they have like a scene where like you're in Clark's childhood bedroom and you see like, oh, he likes like dumb punk band. And it's just fascinating. It's a great way of like getting to know a character that goes to like a deeper level without having to say anything. So I just thought it was really, I never thought about that as a strategy that for character building, to like draw their bedroom. That's such a great idea.
That is really cool. I actually was when I was learning how to do oral history, one of the questions you ask people, just in a random matter what the focal point of your interview is like, tell me about your childhood bedroom, right? Like to get a feel for who they are. Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, I'll go next. I have two, both are comics, although I could talk about non-comics things, because I think we all read in parallel, right? Like all my non-comics is audiobooks, and then the rest is obviously not. So I just reread Can't We Talk About Something More Pleasant by Raj Chast. I work at in kind of like end of life planning is sort of my area in graphic medicine that I really love to work in. Um, but this was with my book group. So it's like a rural area, a somewhat rural area. And these are sort of basically the average age probably is about over 70, 100% female. And most of them had never read a comic, graphic novel, whatever before. And so this was the first. They're voracious readers, really smart, wonderful group. And so I was a little braced for feedback
Mm.
or like pushback, but they loved it. I mean, we had a lot of stories around memories shared about caring for their parents, and then they're really in that point of like they can recall caring for their parents, but they're also concerned about like the kind of limitations their children are going to set on them when they're being cared for, and how to give up that autonomy. Lots of memory share discussions, advanced care planning. It was just wonderful. So I'd like to suggest to anyone out there in a book group, don't be afraid to suggest a graphic memoir or graphic novel or whatever. They loved it, even in this kind of a group. And then the other thing I just want to say is I just finished Alison Bechdel's Spent.
Mm.
I don't know if anyone else has read it, but
Yes.
I just loved it. Like, this may be a bit heresy. I loved it even more than fun. I think it's the best thing Alison Bechdel's ever done. It's so magnificent because part of it is like comparing this like Alison's real life now living in rural Vermont and trying to figure out how to be a like conscious evolved human being in the face of like ordering from Amazon or whatever, right? Like and trying to run a goat farm. And also then characters from the original Dykes to Watch Out For advanced the 30 years since that strip stopped, right? So like they were babies in that strip are adults now and the college kids. It's just terrific and I can't recommend it enough. Maya, you're nodding. Did you want to speak to that?
Oh yeah, I got to read an advanced copy and I had such a good fun time with it. I was almost a little worried that the premise would be like too gimmicky for me, but then it just hit. It was so funny. It was so witty. It felt like such a melding of Ellis the quippiness and the political awareness of Dykes to Watch Out For with sort of some of the introspection of Fun Home. And I don't know that anything can top Fun Home for me because that's really one of my most revisited books, but yeah, it's a good time.
Well, I think that takes us to the end of the podcast. Thank you, Sarah and Maya, for joining us. This was such a great conversation. Like we said, we'll have all the books we talked about in the show, so I think that'll be kind of our growing catalog of maybe recommended books. I may
Yes.
read a book that I don't recommend also at some point,
Could happen.
but all these are good. Yeah. So yeah, thanks again for your work. We're really excited to follow what you both are doing next, and yeah, it was a pleasure to have you be the inaugural winners of this award. It's a great example of what's possible.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us.